right, so, all right, let me share my screen. And once again, I will make this available to everybody, the workshop material with you so that you can look at it and share. And, you ever been to a class or had an experience that you wish you had many years ago? You just, you hear it and everything is so affirming and it's so enlightening that you really wish that you had been able to learn what you're learning now years ago. I've been in ministry now for 46, almost 46 years. I've been pastoring 27 of those 46 years, served as assistant pastor, junior pastor, exhorter, the whole 9 yards in ministry. And this class was one I'm taking. I'm working on a doctorate out of Northeastern Seminary out of Rochester, New York. And part of my semester was taking this 1-unit class on managing stress in ministry. And as I began to read the material, and it's a very short book, but as I began to read it and analyze it and apply it, I was saying to myself, Lord, I needed this book 27 years ago. I needed this information 27 years ago, because so much of what we deal with in ministry is tied, and it is stressful. If anybody tells you that they're ministering and they're not experiencing any level of stress, I'm wondering what they're doing. Okay, and I'm wondering how they doing it, and I'm wondering what they smoking, because I don't think you can do what we do in ministry and not deal with some level of stress that engages your entire family, stress that engages everything about you, stress that engages your marriage, your children, every facet of your life, especially the way most of us end up doing ministry. And we're going to talk about that in detail in a few moments. So that's really the impetus. And it was so impactful to me, and it was so helpful to me. I just wanted to have a chance to share it with whoever would listen. So I just cast out a wide net, whoever had time on a Saturday to come and share, that we would be able to begin talking about this. And so I'm hoping that this will be a dialogue. I'm hoping this will be something that people will feel comfortable in just sharing and articulating as we help each other manage stress in ministry. This is just not anything other than just kind of looking at my life over the last 40 plus years, of the number of things that I have been engaged in and done for a number of times. And I put the years down because I think the years make a difference, because the years tell us that we've engaged a great deal. I got saved when I was 9 years old, and I started preaching when I was 11 years old. And so I have spent the bulk of my childhood, teen years, adult life engaged in ministry in the church in some form or fashion, held a number of different offices, titles, jobs, whatever you want to say. But all of this have been in the context of ministry. I got married as a young elder, and this was literally my life. I got married. I got ordained in August in our convocation in Richmond, Virginia, in 1990. In August, September, I got married. October, I became the assistant pastor of our church. And so that was my progression. And I was 24 years old. I came to Burlington when I was 29 years old. And so a lot of my growth as a man, as a husband, as a father has been connected with ministry. And so, and looking back over just the things I did, the bad decisions I made, and I made some bad decisions along the way, the mistakes I made, the whatever, I understand now that we need as much support and guidance in helping ministers deal with stress, because stress is doing a lot of things to us. It's having physical, emotional, and spiritual impact on a lot of us, depending on how we're managing the stress. And so that's kind of my reasoning. And I want to give you some more concrete reasons about why this particular workshop. And if you want to look at a website, you can look at soulshepherding.org. A lot of good material about pastors and burnout and stress and things of that nature. So I would urge everybody to take a look at that. They even have a burnout survey that you can kind of look to see, are you on the edge of burnout? And I would say that some of our folks, pastors and their wives are on the edge of burnout because of what they're dealing with. Based upon their research, 75% of pastors report being extremely stressed or highly stressed. Now, if you've ever felt that way, or if this is in context, if you ever felt that way or feel that way, just put your hand up. Just raise your hand and, you know, put the icon for hand raising. Yeah, I've been under stress. I felt stress. I've had tremendous times of stress in my life, in ministry. I jumped too fast. 90% of pastors work 55 to 75 hours a week. 90% of pastors work 55 to 75 hours a week. Most of us don't know it while we're doing it, but we're doing it. All right. And with the time, early morning, late at night, any number of situations, you are working, some of us between 55 and 75 hours a week. 90% feel fatigued or worn out every week. You know, literally by Friday, I'm just about done. Okay, because, you know, and I'll tell you, I'm a bivocational pastor, and a lot of pastors have the opportunity perhaps to just do one thing, and that's pastor church. But for most, other than 14 months of my 27 years, I have been a bivocational pastor. And I have literally, you know, when I was 29, I could do it and not blink at it. Somewhere when I hit 40, 45, by Friday, I'm just about fried. I'm just going to be honest about it. By the time I get through with that, the difference is now that my kids are grown. And now that my kids are grown, there's a little less parental stress, but it's a different kind of parental stress because you're trying to help your young adults get launched into life. My son just got married. My daughter is finishing a degree. So there's a lot of stuff going on with my children. And when you're a parent, you're a part of all of that. 70% say they are grossly underpaid. Now, we're not going to talk about our salaries today. We're not going to share that publicly, but I could feel safe to say that most of us are not compensated for the hours that we devote to ministry, whether we're full-time or whether we're bivocational. Most of us are not compensated for those times. And I think everybody could probably echo that they feel like they're not paid, if some of us are even paid. And there were seasons in my life as a pastor where I was doing it and I wasn't compensated a dime for whatever I was doing in ministry to begin and develop the ministry at Refuge Temple. 40% report a serious conflict with a parishioner at least once a month. I don't know if you argue with your members once a month or not, but I think, you know, all of us have had that serious conflict, that serious disagreement. And usually it's probably us trying to intervene in something that went on between two other members, and now we've been forced to challenge it or talk about it or try to resolve it. Before I move on, anybody want to comment on any of the statistics? Do they make sense? Do they seem realistic? Do they fit you? Don't fit you? You know, Bishop, you just all the way off the wall with all this information. Anybody want to share out? Okay, I've never seen this many preachers be quiet at one time.
Well, I'll break the ice. You're blessing me already. My fatigue usually comes Monday morning. I know I can't get tired because on Friday because I got to get ready for Sunday. But as a bivocational pastor who is 46, I'm blessed because sometimes I think something's wrong with me because, you know, the headaches physically, you know, and the lack of time to sometimes get myself together because I'm constantly on the treadmill, it impacts me physiologically at times. And so I appreciate the validation to know that that's not necessarily atypical or abnormal based on where I am.
It's not, you know, and Pastor Graham, in a lot of cases, we all do a good job of maintaining fronts. You know, we want to really look like we're, you know, and we're handling it. So this is not to imply that we're not handling it, but it is to imply that handling it is challenging, it's difficult. And when you're trying to merge so many different things at the same time, it is without question a challenge that touches, and I'll say this before I move forward. Anytime a person comes to me and says they're called to pastoral ministry, I question them intently. And it's not because I don't believe in their call. It's because I know that ministry is going to tap every cell in what makes you you. And if you don't know you're supposed to do this, please go do something else. You know, if you don't know in your heart, in your soul, in your mind, that you are called by God to shepherd, to pastor, to lead, to work in ministry in some very intense leadership level, you need to do something else, because it's going to tax every part of you to do what you do for ministry. Let's move on. Some other stats. 78% were forced to resign from their church, 63% at least twice, and most commonly because of a church conflict. Now, in our Reformation, we don't have a lot of resignations. We do have some, but not a lot of resignations. Generally, we get where we are and we stay where we are. You know, as I said, I've been in the same church for 27 years as the pastor, and pretty much been the only pastor of this ministry, this congregation. And so generally, that's not something that happens, but it does happen in other reformations. It does happen in other denominations that many are forced to resign from the church. And a lot of times it's conflict. 80% will not be in ministry 10 years later, and only a fraction make it a lifelong career. On average, seminary-trained pastors last only 5 years in church ministry. And so it is not a place of longevity. So if you've, and if you would, those who are pastors, just put in the chat how long you've been pastors. I just want to see what that tells us. And this book was written from a denominational perspective, but that's a stunning statistic that only 5% last, you know, and I think it's ingrained in our culture to a great degree to continue no matter what. And so many of our guys don't quit. And I'm not saying that they should, but maybe some of them should. Okay, Pastor DeQual, 9 years. Anybody else? How long have you been in pastoral ministry? Those who are pastors. 13 years. So we have some newcomers, but we have some people who have been engaged for a while in this work and in this ministry. Anybody else want to share how long you've been? Because I think longevity is a big deal. And if you have successful longevity, that's an even bigger deal. 20 years, Pastor Williams. All right. Pastor for 4 years. Okay. Been in ministry since 2008. All right. So we have some veterans, all right, in the midst. 91% experience some form of burnout in ministry, and 18 say they are fried to a crisp right now. That's interesting. Pastor Roy, 18 years. Thank you. So we have a number of folks that have been in ministry for 14 years. Pastor Fowler, thank you, sir. So we have a number of veterans. And so the fact that most of us have passed the 5-year mark means that we've done something, I think, or we've simply had a desire to continue to serve in a powerful way. So I congratulate you on your longevity. Here's a stat that I need everybody to get. 1,700 pastors quit every month. 1,700 pastors leave the keys on the desk, lock the door, walk away from the church, give up. 1,700 do it every month. Every month. So pastoring is a challenging profession. I read one document that said, and I would say this, that one of the things that makes pastoring challenging is that pastoring is to a great degree a very lonely profession. And what I mean by that is, even though you are surrounded by people, even though you serve people, there is nobody in the church like you. All right. There's nobody. You might have other elders, assistant pastors, people that aid you in ministry. But if you're the pastor, you're the only senior pastor in that church. And it's a lonely place. I would say that our Reformation is not always the best place to admit you're struggling, to admit you're having a hard time. because then people begin to say, well, do you have faith? Do you trust God? They question your manhood, they question your maturity, they question everything because you acknowledge, you know what? I felt like throwing my keys at the deacons and walking out the door after I got through on Sunday. But a lot of us do. And so for the 1,700 that quit, there are probably thousands that think about it every day. I will tell you, I have thought about what my life would be like if I wasn't a pastor. I thought about it. I thought about being able to go home at 5 o'clock and decide if I'm going to Bible class or not. It's not I got to go to Bible class because I'm the teacher. It's like every other member of your church. Am I coming or not? Or am I just too tired or too whatever, or got this going on, that going on, whatever the case may be. But when you're the minister, when you're the pastor, when you're one of the leaders of the congregation, that dynamic, you don't even get that choice. You really are on, and it's easy to feel like you're stuck. All right. Especially now, if things are going very well, we all celebrate that. And we know how to celebrate the successes and the growth and the baptisms and people getting saved. We love that. But everyone has dealt with the season. Apostle A. Philip Perry called the season of no amens. When you go into this situation where nobody is telling you what a great guy you are and how blessed they are that they're under your leadership and how much they enjoy your preaching. Sometimes people walk out the church after you've preached your heart out and don't even say a word. Don't even say, hey, just get in the car and go because they've got somewhere to go. And so it can be a place of a lot of discouragement. And that's why we have to learn as a cadre of clergy how to encourage each other because a lot of times we don't get that level of encouragement, perhaps from the people that we are directly serving. All right. Any comments about the stats I've just shared? Anything anybody wants to echo or chime in or ask a question about? Okay. Then let's begin unpacking this. Let's talk about stress for a minute. And I want you to write this down. This is the book that I'm using for this. I always give attribution. I didn't write this material, wish I did, but this is the book, Managing Stress in Ministry by David and Lisa Frisbie, pastor and their wives. And I want to say this gentleman was like a district supervisor, what we would probably call a diocesan bishop in his Reformation. So he had the privilege of assigning pastors and hearing their stories and trying to support them and even hearing their defeats and their movements because of the stress of pastoral ministry. So let's talk about this. There are two kinds of stress that each of us deal with. One of it is eustress, and it's positive stress. And this describes the way that our bodies respond to extreme external stimulation, the excitement of sports, attraction, arousal. I would even say how you feel after you've preached a good message. It went over well, people responded well, and even though you might be worn out physically, you still feel a certain level of pleasure because you felt like the Lord used you and the message was effective. If you're baptizing people, you got to run to church because somebody wants prayer to receive the Holy Ghost and they receive the Holy Ghost. Even though it might be intense, you still have a level of positive stress that I think is positive. It feels good. All right. Then there's distress, and that is losing the game. You gave it all and you lost the game. That's grief, losing a loved one. And I'm gonna say this as a point of reference. I don't know if pastors truly have the right outlet in losing members. Now, I don't know how many of you have had to preach funerals for members who were in your church and they died. And of course, your emphasis at that point is comforting the family. All right. But you just lost a member of your spiritual family. And I don't know if we give ourselves permission to grieve for the loss of the deacon or the mother. The first challenge that I had as a pastor was in the space of, we had never lost anybody. Nobody had died in our church in the first 6 years of our ministry. And then in 2001, in 3 months, we lost 3 members. The first one was one of our deacons that had a liver condition and he passed away. The second one was one of our ministers that passed away due to diabetes complications. And the last one was a 19-year-old the vice president of my youth department, and he had led the worship service on Friday night, did a magnificent job. You know, I was talking and bragging about him to my assistant pastor, and we were having the next service on Saturday, and he left work, lost control of his car, and died in a car accident on his way to go home to change to come to church. And that happened now, over 20 years ago. And I still grieve for Corey, because he was an amazing young man. And he was the kind of guy that you would want your daughter to marry one day, if you had a daughter. And I still wrestle with why the Lord took him. You know, I still grieve for him. You know, his family is still very much a part of our church, and I thank God for them. And we helped them every way we could. But as a pastor, I still grieve. You know, in the pandemic, I lost a mother and a son in the space of a month. The mother died on March 13th. The son died on March 30th. And I had to preach both those funerals in 2001. And I still grieve. I lost 2 associate pastors in the midst of the pandemic. All right. Both of them, one died of COVID, one didn't die of COVID. But I still had to bury 2 associate pastors who were my colleagues in ministry. And once again, you know, I've had a couple of people, well, Bishop, how you doing? But very little in terms of, you know, how am I processing the grief of losing these people? I think distress can be in losing somebody from the congregation. They didn't die, they just left your church. And especially now, there are some people that leave and you say, thank you, Jesus. We all know that. All right. But there are some people that leave that is particularly stressful for us because they were a blessing, or they allowed somebody to run them out of the church, or they allowed a conflict to take them out of the church. That's part of this distress that comes. And there are 3 stages of stress. There's the trigger event. Something triggered the stress. Something's caused the stress. Something created the stress. Then it's your response and your resolution. What did you do to deal with it? And then there's the recovery phase. How do you recover from that stressful event? How do you put yourself back together physically, emotionally, spiritually? How do you put it together? Now, we all maintain and we all keep going, but I would ask this question: is there anybody that has some stress that they haven't recovered from? And I'm going to be the first to say, yes, I've got some stress right now that I've endured. I had a trigger event and I'm still not fully recovered from the stress. Anybody else want to acknowledge or share that? That true? Thank you, Pastor.
I'll acknowledge it. I don't want to share it because then I might be triggered for the rest of the day.
I get you. I understand. Still not recovered. So there are some stressful events that we have dealt with. And, you know, Pastor, you say something very important, because I think a lot of times we just submerge it. We just bury it. And we kind of keep life going. We got to keep things going. But did we ever go back and really deal with, you know, what is causing that stress and recovering from the stress? Because I think sometimes, if nothing else, the stress leaves you fearful. The stress leaves you afraid. Yeah. Could it happen again?
That's it. That's mine.
Could it happen again? And so you're watching and you're nervous about everything. And, you know, years ago, I'll tell you, I didn't get nervous with phone calls and text messages. Now, when I see text messages, I'm like, I'm rolling my eyes in my head like, oh, Lord. Because you just don't know. You just don't know. And it's not knowing, I think, that creates the stress. I mean, literally, this happened to me this week. Good lady, leader in my church, love her. She loves the church. She loves me. I don't have any doubt. But literally, my heart skipped a beat when she texted me and said, can I talk to you? Because I just didn't know what it was about. And it was a wonderful conversation. It was all good news, but because so often what we tend to get hit with is the bad news, we still have this fear of the triggers. I'm just going to be honest. We just have fear of what's going to take place. Is it going to be yet something else? And yes, the brain, the lungs, the heart, the muscles, the stomach are all impacted by stress, especially distress. And, you know, there's an anecdote in the book that I'll share of a pastor who was in a stressful church situation. As a result, he was not sleeping. He had gained 40 pounds from stress eating. And he just decided to quit. And he went back to work on his father's farm He just said, I'm done with preaching. I'm done with ministry. And he went back to work on dad's farm. And do you know what? He lost the 40 pounds. He was sleeping every night. And he was at peace more than he had been in quite some time, because he had removed the stress of ministry from his life. Now, this is not telling all y'all to go find a farm to go run to, but this is the reality of what all of us deal with daily. And once again, we don't talk about it, we don't share it, and it's rarely addressed other than just keep pushing. The Lord's going to bless you after a while. And I just don't know if that's enough to get us through to where we need to be. I know God has called all of us. I know most of you, I know you personally, and I know the zeal and the love that you have for ministry. I know God has called you to ministry, but I want us to help each other manage the stress of ministry so we are better able to traverse where we're going and where God is trying to take us. So
Bishop,
yes, please.
Can I share? I don't want to be the only one talking, but this is good to me. One of the triggering events that's a light one, but it's a real one. When I was a boy in North Carolina, I was in a car with my grandfather, and we were struck in the back by an 18-wheeler, and the trunk went all the way up to the back seat. To the back of the front seat. I happened to be in the front, and I got hit and went up under the dashboard. And from that point on, I thought I was traumatized, but didn't know nothing about it. I was a boy. Years later, I'm married, and my wife and I would be driving, and she'd say, why did every time you get around an 18-wheeler, you start shaking? I said, what? I'm not shaking. What are you talking about? She says, no, every time you get around an 18-wheeler, you slow down, or you kind of shake and speed up. And it wasn't until later on, when I was taking some seminary courses in counseling, that I said, oh my goodness, that trauma was locked in my body physiologically, and I was unaware of it, And so one of the things as an executive coach in my professional life, I encourage people to identify where stress shows up in their body. Mm-hmm. Like for me, it was when I went to the dentist, and they said, you grind your teeth so much that you're wearing away the enamel. And then I said to my wife, do I grind my teeth every night? And he said, that's stress. Mm-hmm. So for me, stress shows up in my jaws and my brow line here. And so when I feel that or sense that, one of the strategies is I'm encouraged to like relax it and relax my face to try to disseminate the stress from my body.
Mm-hmm. And, it's interesting how that event and any life event can really challenge us from a physiological and emotional standpoint. I'll share this with the group, that my parents split up when I was about 6 years old. And I vividly remember my dad packing his bag, walking out of the house, leaving us. And I remember begging him not to go. And then I remember begging him to take me with him, and he didn't. The impact of that event is that Reginald Davis struggles with abandonment issues. All right. And when I first got married, that was a conflict with my wife and myself. And, not that my wife was doing anything to abandon me, but we got married in the 1990s, before everybody had a cell phone and you could find people. You had a work phone, you had a house phone, and there was that window where, person was out shopping at the store, running errands. You couldn't find them. I know everybody now, where you at? That's the first question we ask people when we get them on the cell phone. Where are they? But, when I got married 32 years ago, you didn't know where your wife was until she got home. You didn't know where your husband was until he got home. And, I was struggling, and literally I was sitting in my mother-in-law's kitchen when I realized I'm struggling with abandonment. I am afraid of being abandoned. And believe it or not, I go through that same issue whenever, for whatever reason, somebody decides they want to move on, they want to go to another church, they want to go somewhere else. I relive the abandonment all over again. And I've had to really work and pray and help myself get through feeling as if I'm going to be abandoned by anybody. I'm that way in relationships and friendships. It's just a part of who I am. And it stems from my childhood at 6 years old. And it adds to my stress unless I find a way to manage and control that. So I think it's important that, everybody here, I know we have a very quiet group today. This is the quietest group of preachers I've met in my life, but we have a very quiet group today. But everybody here has a stressor. or area of stress that can, if you allow it, come into and exacerbate the stress of ministry. I want to talk about family stress for just a moment. Did somebody have something to say?
Yes,
Yeah.
Elder Moore, you're here.
Yes,
Quick
sir.
question. So you're talking about triggers here, and I just want to, my question is can you effectively continue to minister if your triggers are people, just to be honest, some people trigger me just by seeing them. Some people they're just visibly seeing them. I am okay. I am fine. I am saved. I'm baptized in Jesus' name. Yes, I know him for myself. But just visibly seeing certain individuals sometimes make me cringe just because of the vibe, the nature that they bring they can suck the life out of the room. And some of these triggers are not going away because you have to minister with these people. And you have to serve with individuals that are not your cup of tea, coffee, or water. So my question is, how do you manage when the thorn ain't going nowhere?
Well, we got a room full of preachers. I'd like to hear from somebody before I answer. If somebody has a response to Elder Moyer, I'd love to hear what we're thinking. Do you have people that trigger you? And what do you do with those people that do trigger you? And you can't get rid of them?
Bishop Davis.
Yes, sir.
I think that one thing that we got to look at, in his case, I've dealt with some of that, but one of the things that I've learned to do is to focus more on those who are there for their help, and rather than to focus on the few that is negative, or who's giving issues, I focus on those who need and who looks for the guidance and the help, and that sort of helped me more than me trying to like retaliate. But at the same time, that I learned how to deal with whatever those people. My whole problem, my whole thing is not to, I would say, not to allow them to affect other people. And I think that's what I deal with most of that. I don't want them to affect other people. So it's mine to do more focus on them so that they can move on with God.
Okay. And thank you. And this is Bishop Michael Austin. Bishop Austin is my brother-in-law. He's the pastor of Greater Ransom Made Across Temple in Henderson. So thank you for being with us.
Something doing with Bishop Reginald, Bishop Davis, pastor class.
The other thing I'd like to add, anybody else want to add? Because we're trying to, if you got people that trigger you, you know they're triggering you, how do you deal with those triggers? Anybody else want to share their thoughts?
Praise the Lord. Praise the Lord. Praise the Lord. This is Elder Richard Taylor.
Yes, sir.
So I've been through something similar in my early days of ministry. I've dealt with a major church hurt from an individual, and it seems like anytime I meet someone with that person's personality, it triggers me. And for a while I've struggled with that until I realized I had to go back and forgive that person that started it. And recently, a few years ago, I was able to look that person in the face, give them a hug, show them my children, show them how I've grown and I moved on. And it was good, and since then, I'm not saying that I'm fully recovered, but it is a part of, it's almost like a test that you got to get past this to kind of, continue to grow. That's how I look at it. You have to, these individuals are not going to go away. And so, it's up to us to mature and to take the higher road. And I'm talking to, and I'm not saying that to you. I'm saying that to me, this is what I had to process, and to deal with those people, because those people are the way that they are because they're hurting too. And they're the way that they are because of some things that happen in their life. And so that's how I'm able to get past it and able to minister to those certain individuals.
Thank you, Elder. And I've heard a lot of good things. So anybody else before I chime in? Anybody else? Because I think this is an important question, because we minister to people, and people can be challenging. And if you don't have any challenging people in your church, give me your address and I'll send you some, because there are challenging people in everybody's church. So anybody else? Well, I would say two things. The first thing, I would echo what Bishop Austin said, and that is focusing on the people that are there with the right spirit, the right attitude. And I will say this, that as a pastor, I have sometimes given too much oil to the squeaking wheel, too much time, too much attention, energy, too much emotional energy. And I remember, I forget who it was about, but Bishop Wilkins is on here, and he's one of my dear friends. And I was talking to him about whoever this was. And Bishop Wilkins gave me a piece of advice that he had gotten from Bishop Jakes, which was, you got to feed the sheep and starve the goats, because all the goats want is your attention. They really don't want to be fed. They really don't want to grow. They just want to suck up all the oxygen in the room, as Elder Moya just said. And you've got to feed the people that want to be fed. And I just don't mean the word. I mean, even your time and attention. And I'm not saying you should ignore people or avoid people, but think about the investment that you're giving versus the return. And if you're just pouring and pouring and pouring, and all you get is, like it's pouring water down a duck's back, then you've got to decide, is it worth the emotional investment to continue? Now, the other question you have to ask yourself, and Elder Taylor alluded to that, is, have you truly forgiven that person? Because in a lot of cases, what you're feeling is a lack of forgiveness. And I'm going to say this, it's not always that they did something. Sometimes you just hate their stank attitude. And you've got to find a way to forgive them for exuding that attitude, even though they may have not have done or said anything to you, but you've got to find a way to love them through it. The Bible says love covers a multitude of faults, and that may be the fault they're dealing with. The Bible talks about praying for them, and the Bible, and this is when you know you've really matured, when you can do good to them and do good towards them. When you can, like he said, share the pictures of the kids and appropriately embrace them and what have. All of this is a lesson. And what I always tell my children, and we have these conversations on a regular basis, is that you have to ask yourself, and I know it's a cliche, what would Jesus do? Now, Jesus might very well confront them, and there may come a time when you have to confront them. All right, but at the same time, Jesus would continue to love them, and he would continue to try to embrace them as long as they were willing to be embraced. I don't know if that makes any sense, but that's my thought about that. Did this help, Elder Moya?
Somewhat. I think in hindsight, I think my question might have been misinterpreted.
Okay, so
it's
clarify.
not in regards to parishioners, the people that you're necessarily ministering to or preaching to. More along, the question was aligned with people that you actually have to work with side by side in leadership capacities, not from minister to parishioner.
I got you.
But fellow laborers in the gospel.
And they can be challenging too.
If that puts a different.
No, it puts the exact spin on it, because.
So I think.
Yeah. I hear what you're saying. We work in a church environment where, we're in districts, we're in dioceses, we're in organizations, and it puts us with people sometimes that don't share our experiences, sometimes that don't share our passion, sometimes that don't share our attitudes, and that can be challenging. That can be challenging. Years ago, I was diocese president in North Carolina. And it was a good place, but it was also a stressful place. And Elder Graham, every diocese meeting, I got what I call my state meeting headache. And it would come on somewhere about 2 p.m. on Saturday and not let up until I got to Saturday night worship, where just the stress of managing this problem, hearing this complaint, hearing this issue, just kind of bombarded. This one was being negative or whatever. And it just takes hold, and that was my outlet. My head would start hurting. And I knew when my stress level had gotten to the top, because then my head starts hurting. And I'm like, okay, I got to figure out how to navigate my way through all of this. So, and once again, doesn't mean the people are sinners, but people are challenging. And I don't know if we do enough work in group dynamics, in team building, in team, even ground rules for teamwork in the church or in the diocese or in the district, so that people know how to work together, because people just assume that we know how to work together, and that's not always the case. That's not always the case. Any other thoughts? All right, let's return.
Yes, Bishop, this is Elder Tullet. I'm driving everyone, so grace and peace, everyone. God bless you.
Okay, yes, sir.
Did I cut off?
Yeah, you cut off, so start again, please.
Oh, okay. I said I was telling everyone grace and peace to them. And along the lines of what Elder Moye was talking about, a lot of it, and a lot of times we just sort of call it what it is. And when it's your peers and when it's other pastors and when it's other people, a lot of some type of jealousy, some type of envy, and that can stress you out because you're just trying to do what God has called you to do. And then you have your peers or whatever that are throwing, for lack of a better term, shade or more anxiety on top of you. So, how do you, what does this lesson teach us about dealing with that?
Say the last part of your question again.
I said, so in this lesson, what does that teach us about dealing with that?
We're going to come to conflict in a minute. And so we're going to deal with that piece.
And I'm speaking about
Are you speaking about the jealousy?
Yeah, the jealousy, the envy, the stress that you can get from your peers, and not even in your church, but from other churches that even maybe in your surroundings, or people that should be supporting you.
It's real. We don't like to admit it, but it's real. And sometimes people see where you are, where you're positioned, whatever's happening in your particular branch of Zion. And the easy thing to say, if I go to Azusa and I see the altar packed with young people and I see the Lord blessing, is just to say God is blessing my godson Quentin. That's the easy thing to say. It's just say God's blessing him. But so often, I think we have attached ourselves to a kind of kill the guy that's in front, or kill the guy that's blossoming, or kill the lady that's blossoming, to the point that we try to find any reason for their success other than that they're succeeding and that the God is blessing them. And you have to become, and a lot of this is emotional immaturity and spiritual immaturity. And once again, these are things that we have to begin to address and teach, that part of the maturity of a believer is to be able to celebrate the success of a brother and sister. And if God can't bless, somebody, if God can't bless and favor somebody, I'm always privileged to go to Alabama to be with Bishop Hill. And every time I've gone there, I've seen the Lord's favor upon the church and the ministry. And it excites me because that means God is blessing. And, and so some of that is people have a disposition of competition. And we have to eliminate that mindset, but it's very much a mindset in the church. It's very much akin to what happened in Corinth, where people got lined up around personalities. And Paul said, one waters, one planteth, one waters, but it's God that gives the increase. So if God is blessing somebody, talent, ability, skill, growth, whatever the Lord is doing, we all ought to celebrate that. And you know what? We have to change the culture, Elder Toll, and I'll say this, and part of the way we change the culture is by learning how to celebrate the people around us. Not just don't celebrate you, but I'm looking on this line and I could spend the rest of this afternoon talking about the things I've seen, because I know most of you. And I've been there. I've seen you operate in ministry. I've seen the Lord blessing you. I've seen the Lord do things, but we don't talk enough about others. We talk about ourselves. We testify. The Lord did this. The Lord did that. The Lord did the other. And yes, he did all of that. But when was the last time you testified about somebody else that was succeeding or prospering or growing in ministry and you celebrated them? That's how you change this culture of people being negative about other people's success, that just don't blow your horn, blow somebody else's horn. I hope I'm making sense with what I'm saying, that we've got to learn how to celebrate. If you're part of a staff of a church and one of your ministers, I was so blessed because I was away last Sunday and Elder Taylor preached, but I read Elder Dokes' commentary about Elder Taylor's sermon. And that just blessed me, that it wasn't, Elder Taylor didn't have to say, oh, the Lord used me. Elder Dokes said, the Lord used Elder Taylor. And that's a team builder. That's how we build the team, by fostering and helping. Carolina, which I'll talk about just for a moment, because they've disappointed me horribly this March. But in any event, Dean Smith's philosophy was not just to celebrate the guy who made the basket, but the guy who made the assist. Because it built the team atmosphere. And so often we just celebrate one or two or just ourselves when we really have to begin celebrating our entire team. And our team is even bigger than what's in our local church and beyond. I hope that's making sense. Let's return to family stress for a moment. I want to kind of move on. I want to respect our time. Well-organized families are better able to manage stress. And so one of the emphasis of this book is to look at your family dynamic, to see how can you use your family not to absorb the stress, but to eliminate adding more stress to your life. And so how your family is organized, having a high degree of unity, having reciprocal functioning. In other words, everybody's roles complementing each other and functioning well in their broader community. Teaching your children to be self-supporting or self-sufficient, because it is stressful when you've got somebody 30 years old who's living at home and doesn't have a job, doesn't have a career, doesn't have a plan. That's going to add to stress in your life. Them being law-abiding and responsible. You don't want to keep having to go to court with your kids, or, here and there, traffic tickets, other violations, things of that nature. You want them, and then you want them with friendly relationships. Are there friends, people that are trustworthy? A lot of that is what you put in, of course, as you're raising your kids. And here's a key question, because your family is going to be a part of your ministry, because A, they're with you, and B, hopefully they'll be assisting you in ministry. Is your family resilient? Does your family have the capacity to bounce back? That's an important question. Anybody want to take a stab at why that issue is so important about family resilience? Talk to me, somebody.
Well,
Bishop,
I want to say something on that,
please,
if I may. And I can say this because I didn't get this until I became pastor and in leadership. I grew up from a family of church leaders. So my grandfather was pastor, my father was pastor, and all that. And so they taught us at an early age that we also represent them, and many churches are broken up and torn up because they got problems with the kids or they got problems with the family. And we didn't buy into this. I didn't sign up for this. And so if I can't take you talking about my father and not take it personally, because we overhear things, if we don't know how to process those things as the family, then we have the tendency to just blow the whole church up, and Dad's ministry goes away, and we just think we're all separate people, and that's his ministry. But you have to learn that you also are part of keeping it together, building it, while all eyes are on you as well as they're watching him. And so that resilience has to be, it is for the family to have it as well, to understand and feel that even though we're not the leaders, we're still part of what makes the church grow in him.
Mm-hmm. Very good point, Bishop. Very good point. You know, that resilience, because, you know, as much as we try to protect our kids, my wife is a preacher's daughter, and she labored arduously to protect our kids from the downside of ministry. We both tried to protect our children from the negativity, the backbiting, the strife, the competition, those things that show up in everybody's church. We tried hard to protect our kids from it, but they still got exposed to it. It's just a reality. But learning how to bounce back from it, learning how to bounce back from a church mishap or a church struggle or a church trial, all of those things are so important, because you bring it home. You bring it home, even if you don't talk about it, you bring it home. And sometimes your kids will see it when you think they don't see it, and they are a lot more perceptive than we give them credit for. And being able to process all of that, and the family structure become a haven for you. You know, your family ought to be a place where you can retreat. It ought to be a place where you can find some level of shelter and care and support, so that you can go back out and do what you're supposed to do. But if the family becomes a destructive or a toxic place, then the toxicity of your life just increases. And so we're going to talk a little bit more as we go further about how we invest in our families, because once again, we want our families functioning well. We want to receive reciprocal functioning. I know, you know, most of us are the parents, but you need to also receive. You know, I'll tell you this story about my son. His godfather was one of my closest friends, and he died relatively young. And I remember leaving the funeral and saying to my son, well, Reg, my best friend is gone. And Joel was maybe 14, somewhere between 14 and 16. He looked at me and said, well, Dad, I'll be your best friend. And, you know, quite honestly, that was a very emotional moment for me. And I can honestly say that my son, now at 31, is my best friend. You know, we talk daily, we communicate daily, we minister to each other, we support each other. He is my friend. All right. I raised him, but I didn't just raise a man, I raised a friend. I want to read Sister Michelle's comment. I've always heard people say that the devil is more after the church kids because he's trying to crush the family of God. That's why they experience so many difficulties and experiences that seem to cause shame to the family of God. Is the devil after the Christian kids more than the worldly kids? Well, the Bible says this, that the children of darkness are wiser than the children of light. And our kids are sheltered. So sometimes they're not probably as savvy about things as they probably should be. And in our attempt to keep them holy, we sometimes hide them from information they might need to make some good decisions. And so it's really important. I think that Satan's after ministry. And if your kids are involved in ministry, then Satan's after them because they're involved in ministry. But we have other people in saints who are not the pastor's family, and they get attacked as well because they are engaged in ministry. Satan desires to crush ministry. And so we've got to learn how to fortify all of our children. But I would say that the pastor's family is very much on the front line. Whatever the enemy can do to disrupt, because if he disrupts the pastor's family, that's going to impact the pastor. I've known some pastors, because their kids messed up, they felt like they should quit because their son or daughter messed up. And I'm like, well, that's your son and daughter. You know, that's not you. You didn't make that decision for them. They have a mind and a brain, and I'm assuming you didn't teach them this behavior. But if they made a bad decision, it's not for you to run and to be ashamed. And in fact, sometimes God puts us on display so he can show his grace and redemption. And when our kids bounce back from a failure, when they bounce back, I'll just be random, from a teen pregnancy, when they bounce back from a criminal charge, you know, that because it is your family, everybody sees it and knows it. And how we handle that, I'm gonna talk about that a little bit later, but how we handle that is important, that, you know, we not go into retreat and hiding because you're dealing with real life. Because some of this is the nuance of real life that every family faces and deals with and confronts. And I don't mean just in 2023. We were dealing with this stuff in the 70s and the 80s and the 90s. It's always, and if you talk to people older than me in the 60s and the 40s and the 50s, the church just did a better job, I think, of damage control. And I think social media has hurt us that we don't do a good job of damage control. So it gets out there and it takes a life of its own and it becomes more toxic. But the challenges of family life have been a part of us from the beginning. There's always been, for whatever reason, anybody's kid, pastor, missionary, deacon, saint, brother on the front pew. There's always been some challenge that we have to deal with. And we got to talk about how we make our families safer places for spiritual nurturing and spiritual growth and development as well.
Bishop Davis.
Yes, sir.
Yes, that's one thing that I've learned to do. Of course, I've come from, my father was a pastor, and now I'm a pastor, and I know that the enemy would love, because sometimes those things are hard to deal with. When your son get a charge, or your daughter get pregnant, or your son your daughter get somebody's daughter pregnant, or something like that. You have to learn how to deal with that. But I agree very much with you that there is no time to stop ministry because something happened. These things will happen in life, But I've learned one thing, and I did this a few weeks ago, is to just spend time. Matter of fact, I call a family meeting, and just spend time and just saying, hey, how y'all doing? Mm-hmm. Because it is stress in ministry. And not only does the pastor stress in ministry, the wife stress in ministry, your children are going through the same thing. Mm-hmm. Because they have to learn how to deal with stuff, because we all live in a glass house. Mm-hmm. And people are watching, so we have to be very careful. And so I just took the time out to just sit down with my family. Just no cameras, no pulpit, no nothing. Just sit there and just say, hey, listen, what is going on? What is going on with you all? How are you all handling this? How are you all handling this? And of course, you can see things. And I think, and I'm going to tell you, it led to a couple of hours of discussion. Mm-hmm. Everybody was doing good, but it led to a couple of hours discussion on how, and I think that was a very good outlet for them to be able to even, and sometimes, as the pastor, you might end up getting the blunt of it, and they saying, well, we need to change this, we need to change that. But at least they do get it out so mm-hmm. that they can learn how to deal with ministry. And I'd rather for them to blow up at me than to go to church and blow up at somebody else.
I got you. I hear you. And we have similar conversations, and finding that balance, because, they're a part of your family, but they're a part of your congregation. A lot of us pastor our children. I pastor my adult children. And so I have to embrace them not only as my son and my daughter, and now my daughter-in-law. I have to embrace them as members of the church family. And how would I respond if this was just Brother Reggie Smith coming to me to share concerns or whatever? How would I fathom that and deal with that? And that's part of that dynamic as well. Absolutely. 5 key stressors that impact ministry health and well-being. Role ambiguity. Believe it or not, the role of the pastor and his wife is a key source of stress in ministry. And tell me if you've dealt with this, anybody. If you are highly involved, highly engaged, highly active leading, then you're doing too much. You're taking on too much. The other members can do stuff. Why you got to do everything? And they'll say that about you, and they'll say that about the pastor's wife. If you don't engage and you put space in and you allow people to do other things, then at the same token, what's happening now? Oh, he's not concerned about the ministry. He's leaving it. It's just hanging loosey-goosey. There's a lot of ambiguity. The pastor is expected to be the spiritual leader of the congregation. But at the same time, if he's receiving tithes or if he's receiving a salary or housing allowance, he's also an employee of the church, because a portion or all of his livelihood may come from the church. And most of us wrestle with 2 temperaments. All right. And you can tell me kind of how you feel about what I'm about to say. One temperament is, I am the undisputed leader of the congregation. The buck stops here. I'm the last say, I'm the last word. I'm it. You know, I'm God's man, God's servant. Don't you dare challenge or question. And some of us lead from that paradigm. Some of us are people-pleasing pastors, that when the people complain about X, Y, Z, we run, we respond, we jump, you know, because we want to keep the people happy, because if they're happy, they keep coming to church, they keep supporting, they keep working, they keep giving, etc. And I think most of us live between those two worlds. So what's it like living in those two worlds? Somebody besides me, tell me what's it like living in those two worlds, between being the leader and trying to please the people. Don't be scared. What's it like living in those two worlds? Or living between those two lines. I think those are two boundaries. I don't think any of us is in either one or two, but I do think we live between the two. So what's it like? What's the challenge?
At times it can be mentally and emotionally taxing, based on the situational context, the spiritual context. My experience is that sometimes we may have to do one, the other, or be a blend of both. And knowing how to employ that through discernment and situational analysis, that process is taxing.
Mm-hmm. It's very taxing. You know, that's why most of us preach better when we go to other people's churches. Did y'all know that? Because all I got to do is preach. I ain't got to worry about whether the lights are working or the bathroom is stopped up, or if Deacon Jones didn't get there on time with the van to pick the people up. I don't have to worry about any of that. I just have to open my Bible and preach, you know, and because it's challenging, because on one hand, you know, you're charged to lead, and you cannot be a pastor, you cannot be an elder, you cannot be an associate pastor and not feel the weight of leadership on your shoulders. If you don't, there's something wrong with that paradigm. And so there comes a time when you have to make the tough calls, when you have to make the hard decisions, when you have to do the dirty work of leadership. At the same time, you're trying to balance that with maintaining a collegial and a somewhat open environment for care for people, so they feel comfortable and they feel cared for in the congregation. So that's a challenge. That's a challenge. And there is a role ambiguity that we face. And then on top of that, you know, we're talking as leaders today, you know, for some of us, the church is part of our livelihood, you know, and so, you know that we don't preach for money, but then again, we do. Because if they're giving you money for preaching, you're preaching for money, all right? You know, that's what the late Bishop Carter said. But the reality is, you're not preaching it for gain, but that is a part of your livelihood. And so there's a balance to that creates stress of doing the right thing for the right reasons. And it is an act of faith. You know, you don't let people doctor your sermons because you're afraid of offending them. You know, at the same time, I'm going to say this, I don't think we should go out in the pulpit slashing and burning. I think if we've got something to say to somebody in our church, we ought to say it to them, all right, and not build a sermon around trying to get somebody that we're afraid to confront because of their behavior or their actions. You know, if you've got one member who talks too much, then go after that one member that talks too much and leave everybody else alone. That's just my advice. Number 2, performance anxiety.
Amen.
Okay, performance
Amen.
anxiety.
Well said.
Depending on where your ministry is, you can have the evaporation of self-esteem. Now, I know we all are humble servants. I know we all are humble before God. I know we're submitted to God. I know we love God. But each one of us deals with some level of performance anxiety. And when we don't feel like we're performing, and it comes from 2 places for most ministers. It comes from personal charm, because I'm looking through this, you know, through this Zoom, and most of you are likable people. You smile a lot. You know how to greet people and deal with people. And that's personal charm. All right. And some people, I'm going to be honest, they're not in your church because you're the best preacher. They're in your church because you're a nice person and they like you as a person. You know, there are other people that preach as well or better than you, but they like you because you are kind, you're caring, you're thoughtful, you're a listener, you take time with people, and that is part of your personal charm. Then there's charisma, which is your preaching and teaching ability. Some of us are good at what we do. We do it well. We're experienced, we're seasoned. I've heard most of you preach, and you're good preachers. You're good deliverers of the word. So here's the question. Is stagnant growth or decline in the church an indication of a loss of charm or diminished preaching ability? Anybody ask that question to yourself sometimes? When the church wasn't growing, people were leaving, you know, you start to question and that's a sign of, that's a source of stress. You're wondering, I mean, because you're giving it all you got Sunday after Sunday, and nobody's coming in the altar call, nobody's getting saved, nobody's coming, nobody new is coming, nobody's bringing anybody new, and you start to wonder, is this because I have diminished in some way? I'm going to throw another piece in. When you get to be my age, and I'm looking at 60. All right, I'm not there yet, but it's down the street. It is literally down the street and around the corner. Then you start to wonder, am I, and I was preaching as a young man, have I lost it because I'm not as young as I was before? And is that a source of anxiety? Because my youth is fading. And my wife was the one that told me, she said, you're not the young preacher you used to be. And almost broke my heart when she told me that. But it was just a reality that I've changed. I've aged. We're all going to age. If the Lord keeps us, we're all going to age. And does the aging or does the stagnant growth make you question that you've lost your charm or you've diminished as a preacher? Anybody want to comment on that?
Well, since I'm the only one that's going to say something, great question. And it's very easy for us to always question ourselves. And I know if I'm expounding God's word on a Sunday, and it's like the people aren't getting with the word or something like that, the first thing I say is, how am I presenting this? What's going on? Do I need to make a change or something like that? But the one thing that I do realize, and in prayer, God taught me, God gave people free will. So people are going to do what people are going to do. Because of that free will. And most of the time, and I'll say most of the time, because we do have those that will turn somebody off, but most of the time it has nothing to do with the preacher, his personality, or the word that God gave him.
Okay. Because, you know, the word is the word. And as long as you're not preaching vindictively, as long as you're not preaching in an attempt to shame, but to bring contrition and repentance, it's the word of God. You know, and all of us have our own style of delivery and presentation. And I'm going to say this, every member or every person is not meant for your church. And you got to be okay with that everybody's not meant for your particular congregation or your particular ministry. You know, that's why there's more than one congregation in your city, so that they can find the word, find the truth, find a person that can deliver it the way they can receive it. And I've had to accept that reality, because I think sometimes we really, you know, if everybody that walks in doesn't join the church, we think we've done something wrong. And maybe you've done nothing wrong. You preached the word like God gave it to you. You did it with the best of your ability. You were nice, you were kind, you were inviting, and they still end up going somewhere else. You can't take that person. I know some of us do, but you can't. All right. And that, you know, everybody's not going to come into your net. That's just the reality. And you can't beat yourself up with performance thinking, now, I'm going to say this, every time I preach, I expect somebody to get saved. I do. And it's not because I think I'm that good. I just believe in the power of the word. So I expect people to get saved every time I preach. I expect it. All right. But I understand that they may not come into Refuge Temple. They might go to the church down the street or around the corner or in the next town. And that's okay, as long as they get the word and they get saved. And we've got to be okay with that, because there are people that God is assigning to your hand. And at the same time, are you faithful to the people? The Lord said this to me when I first started pastoring, because I was very concerned about what I thought was the lack of growth of the church. And, you know, it was really playing with my head. And the Lord said, those people that are sitting with you don't have to be there. They could be somewhere else. If they get up, put on their clothes, and come to church on Sunday, you need to give them the very best that you have, because they came to hear the word that I gave you. And it completely changed my perspective so that it wasn't about the numbers in the seats. It was about, Lord, use me to bless those that are in the seats, because, we're looking at the congregation. And if the place is not packed to the walls and you see somebody else who's packed to the walls, you start to question. Now, I'm not saying we shouldn't question our methodologies and look at ways to draw and attract. I'm always studying church growth. I'm always studying what it takes to grow people in the church. I do that because this is what I do. But at the same time, I can't let it play with my head, because for whatever reason, at this particular day and the time, people aren't coming in. They're going to come if I keep doing what God told me to do. And I have to believe that. And I can't allow even what might be stagnant growth, or even what might be a diminished, kill my zeal for what God has called me to do. Any other thoughts?
Bishop Davis?
Yes.
Bishop Wilkins here. So I think that's a really good insight. One of the things that I've noticed is that churches the congregation tends to look like the pastor.
Mm.
And so your strongest numbers typically are the people in your age group, oftentimes.
Mm-hmm.
And that is because you're preaching, you're teaching, it hits home because you're also preaching your growth, your development, your experiences in your messages. So that may filter in it. I think that the true sign of success for ministry is being able to have a multi-generational church.
Mm-hmm.
That the pastor can preach and teach and share beyond his generation.
Mm-hmm.
That older mothers can respect this man, even if he's younger. That younger people also see him as a source of wisdom for their generation, because as the preacher ages, the congregation ages, and so it's whether or not that pastor can still in his net catch a variety of ages and generations of individuals, and how does that pastor remain current?
Mm-hmm.
Because I've been preaching long enough. I've been preaching since I was 16. I know that the church world has a flavor of the month. That clearly the new guy, whomever he may be, will have his run. The sign of the real preacher is being able to remain fresh, even when they're not calling as much as they used to, or even if they are calling, you're getting different types of calls, and so it's being able to have a church and a reach that is beyond just your age group, your generation, but to be able to have a wide reach of individuals that span different generations. I hope that makes some sense, but I think that that's the true sign of success, not in whether or not you are being called, but as a pastor, you're seeing a multi-generation that's being pulled into the ministry. I think that that's success, because it's easy if you're 50-something to have a whole lot of 50-somethings in your group. Typically, that's what studies show, that the pastor attracts his age group, the people in his generation, he typically attracts. But if you can attract, and I'm not talking about attracting young people who have to be there. So for instance, my daughter Madison, who's 3, has to come to church with me on Sunday morning. My daughter Maya, who's 18, is at an age where she can say now, perhaps, Dad, I don't want any longer. I want to do something else. So attracting a generation that doesn't have to be there is I think key, and does show signs of success. And because the devil will get in your head. I mean the mental fight. I don't know about you, but the mental fight that I have to participate in or cast out before I get to the pulpit on Sunday morning is big. I mean it's between the chair and the actual pulpit, there's a whole lot of, why is the sister so-and-so here this morning? What does this mean? Why is it look a little thin in here with it? So all of that kind of stuff that you have to deal with before you actually grace the pulpit is a tremendous challenge.
And I agree, Bishop. You really hit a lot of things on the head regarding this, and the notion of multi-general ministry. That's what we want, because and part of it is not even as the pastor ages, his age and even his ministry, as much as the structure of the church. Is the church youth friendly? Is the church senior friendly? Is the church, in other words, is there a place for everybody? And I gave this to my congregation. If, mom, dad, grandma, and 3 kids walk into your church, would they find a place in your congregation? Would there be a place for them? Would they feel connected with your congregation? Because the preaching is just one aspect of ministry. I know now we've become a Sunday morning culture, but you got to have other stuff going on. What are you doing for young people? What are you doing for seniors? What are you doing for singles? What are you doing for married couples? All of those are part of the dynamic of developing and growing ministry. And we have to think outside of that box, because it can't just be, and a lot of us are strong preachers. We preach well. And I told people years ago that people will come to our church because of Reginald Davis. They will stay at our church because of Refuge Temple. What does Refuge Temple offer beyond Reginald Davis preaching on Sunday morning? And that has a great determining, and we have to always think in that terms. And as I'm getting older, I'm thinking about the totality of the ministry and its impact and how we draw and sustain those people, and not allow it to always be a calling card on your personal validation. I'm going to move on from this. You can't just let what happens in that pulpit be how you personally validate who you are as a person. All right. Because you're basing a lot. Now, because did you deliver it? Was it received? Those are 2 vital questions. And sometimes the reception of the word has nothing to do with how you delivered it. Sometimes people just sit and look at you like you're crazy, because you're telling too much truth sometimes. And because you're telling too much truth, I can't respond because this is all about me. And sometimes that's what you get. So this is definitely a source of stress. 3, the bivocational complexity. And I know several of you along with me are bivocational ministries. How does bivocational ministry impact marriage and family? Anybody want to share that? How does bivocational ministry impact marriage and family? Any thoughts?
Well, I would like to say that with me personally, just trying to make a balance has been somewhat challenging at times. We've gotten better with trying to manage. I work 60 to 80 hours a week. I go into work at 2:30 in the morning. Some days, and some days I don't get off to 8:30 at night to go right back the next day at 2:30 in the morning. And on certain days, my Bible study night is on night. I still go to 2:30. Sometimes get off 4:35. Still have my Bible class. Still have my other things that I have going on. But I've done better where I'm actually able to say, okay, this day, we're just going to focus on family day. Family day is whatever time I get off. We're going to have family time, and creating that time where I'm just having some time with just me and my wife. Sometimes the kids, I have learned that they just want their daddy. They could care less if I work 18 hours that day or 17 hours that day. They want to see their father. And so just trying to make that balance where all needs are met, where I have time with my kids, time with my wife, and just time to myself. I think that has helped tremendously, because at times before it was just like church, 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 church. And it was hewn, church, 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 church. But at the end of the day, you still have family at home that if there's no time for them, they don't want to see church. They don't want to hear about church because they have shared church with everybody else. And so having that balance has blessed me to be able to have some time that all needs are met. And I have 6 children, 2 boys and 4 girls. Right?
Got it. Anybody else? How does bivocational ministry impact marriage and family? I'll speak to this because, and give you time, because I do want to hear from some other thoughts. You know, I have been a bivocational minister for all but 14 months of my pastoral ministry. In fact, you know, I've always done ministry with something else. I was a minister and a student. I was a minister and a teacher. I was a minister and an assistant principal. I was a minister and a principal, you know, and so I've done all of that. And the one reality, and a member told me this one time, she said, you know, Pastor, no matter how hard you try, you can't make more time. You can't, there's only 24 hours in a day. It's only 7 days in a week. And you can't create more time. You don't have that ability. And so you have to be very deliberate about where you spend your time and how you spend your time. And you've got to be very deliberate about how your family deals with the time. Because if you're going from my life, my school day starts about 8 to 9 o'clock in the morning. I'm there until 4 o'clock, 5 o'clock. If there's an activity, 7, 8 o'clock. And then in the midst of that, there's Bible class, there's prayer service, there's meetings, there's other activities. There's, you know, I also travel as an evangelist. So there's all of those things in the equation. And so it's very easy to get into a mindset where you think, you know, I'm just supposed to grind from work, grind from church. And then you wonder why your family is become alienated. You know, we did something as a couple that helped us out quite a bit because my wife also works. So we're always busy. So we started what we called giving each other days. And Monday is my day. That's the day where I don't have to do anything. I don't have to see anybody. I don't have to pick up the kids. When we had kids that young, it's just my day. I can lay on the couch. I can go, you know, to go bowling. I can go to the bookstore. I can do whatever I want to do on Monday. My wife's got the house. Wednesday was her day. And she would go and do whatever she wanted to do. She'd go out. She'd hang out with her girlfriends. She'd go do the hair, the nails, whatever she wanted to do. Wednesday was her day. I had the kids and I cooked. I did whatever I needed to do. Thursday, we gave to our children. And that was always their day. And that was kind of like whatever Maury said, their family day. But the whole notion was because we knew how packed our lives were, we had to ensure that everybody got a level of undisturbed time. All right. So if you're, you know, whether you admit it or not, being bivocational does impact your marriage and your family because you got 2 jobs and you've got 2 full-time jobs. Even if you don't draw 2 full-time salaries, if you're leading a church and you're working a job, you've got 2 full-time jobs. Pulpit envy is what I used to feel towards Bishop Wilkins because Bishop Wilkins worked for Greater Refuge Temple and I worked for Refuge Temple in Burlington and Northern High School. So I had pulpit envy. I need a pulpit like Wilkins, where he only has one place to go, one thing to do, you know. And yeah, I will confess I had envy against my brothers who were, for whatever reason, privileged to be full-time ministers. All right. Sometimes not knowing the sacrifice that was involved because, you know, the people that I know, they've sacrificed to do that. They've sacrificed some things that I enjoy so they can live off of one salary. All right, and that salary being ministry, which in so many cases is not at the level of what you can make professionally in your other profession. Ministry and the F word, and the F word in this context is failure, because it's possible to do both the ministry and the job and fail at one or fail at both. Anybody ever felt that pressure? Where you were doing the job and the church, and you felt like you weren't doing good at either one of them? Any thoughts? Y'all are real quiet. Y'all have gotten quieter now than any time in this discussion. Any thoughts?
Well, I did want to say that I think one very interesting piece that you know, the whole envy piece. I actually envy people who aren't in ministry full time, and the reason that is because most of my friends are getting to the stage and age where they're now beginning to say, okay, I only have to do another 10 years and I can cash in my chips. I don't know if ministry is that way. Everything that I've seen, you know, they want, even if you're hooked up to to a respirator, they want you to remain in ministry. And so
the other aspect of it is, for me, everything is church. And so I go to church for prayer, I'm going to work.
Mm-hmm.
When I go to church for a birthday party, I'm going to work. When I'm going to a funeral, I'm going to work. Going to, to christen a baby, or it all runs together.
Mm-hmm.
And so when your worship is your work, it's a whole nother challenge.
Thank you for that, Bishop, because that is a perspective that we don't often consider. Absolutely. Yes, sir.
And Bishop Wilkins, it's interesting because as a bivocational pastor, I feel the converse of that sometimes, where I have a slight degree of guilt because I'm working all day and then going to teach or preach or counsel, and I'm viewing that as another job, not necessarily a ministry or a calling for the Lord. And I gotta bang these things out today. They're all mushed together because I don't want that headache to come in. And so that's some of the challenges that I have to pause and remember. There's work unto man, there's work unto God, but sometimes the work unto God, I approach it like work unto man.
Wow. And I think the difference between the bivocational and the pastor is and the church work is that for most of us, even if we're in leadership positions at work, there is an end to the work day. I'm out of here at 5 o'clock. I'm out of here at 7 o'clock. I'm out of here at 3 o'clock. There's an end to the day. When you do ministry, and Bishop Wilkins makes a very good point, there is sometimes no end to the day. You can work, and I have been a full-time pastor where that's all I did. And that work was just as challenging because it would start at 9 in the morning and not end sometimes until 11 o'clock at night. Because by the time you get through doing the business side of church, the work side of church, the noonday prayer, the Bible class, the revival service, you've literally been out of your house. Whereas, most days, if there's not a service, I'm going home. I'm going to my family. I'm going to be home at a certain time. They kind of know what time to expect me at the house. But even that becomes a balancing act because they know, even in this day and time with, a lot of what we do electronically, we're not at the church quite as often as we have been in the past. But even that is, I'm coming home, but as soon as I get home, I'm getting on the Zoom. I've got a Zoom for Bible class, a Zoom for the bishops, a Zoom for this meeting, a Zoom for that meeting. And so it's still like you're at your other job at the church as opposed to that. And that balancing is a challenge. And it is possible to be doing both and doing the best you can, but feeling like a failure at both of those because you feel like I'm running from here, I'm running from there, I'm ripping and running. I've said this sometimes that my life belongs to everybody but me. And everybody's looking for a piece of my life and a piece of my time. And when people come to you and say, and the first thing they say is, Pastor, I know you're busy. That means they almost feel guilty about approaching you about things. And you don't want that kind of relationship with the membership. You want them to feel comfortable talking to you. You don't want them to waste your time, but you don't want them to feel like they can't take some of your time. That you don't ever want to create that paradigm as well. So the bivocational piece, and most of us on this call are bivocational pastors. So anybody got a tidbit that's working for you in the bivocational arena? Anybody got something that's working for you that you can share with the brothers? So our follow-up will be a session on bivocational ministry and how we can make it work so that we don't all feel like we're drowning in the midst of bivocational ministry. But this is important because I would dare say that probably 75% of our ministry cadre are bivocational ministers. And we need to help these ministers, especially if we want them around for the long haul. Okay. Item 4, I want to be sensitive to our time. Financial scarcity. Many pastors leave ministry solely because of the financial scarcity that is often attached to preaching in the average church. And the reality is we have a full-time job with part-time pay. And so even if you are a full-time minister, most of us could look at something else we could do that we could make a lot more money and have only one job, as opposed to, and I will say this as a pastor, not only was I not paid, I was pouring a great deal of my personal salary into the church so that the church could stay afloat. And whatever the church could not afford through the tithes and offering, Charity and Reginald was buying for the church to make sure that the church had. So we oftentimes look better than we actually were. All right. You know, we're in the best position now that we've ever been as a congregation from a fiscal standpoint, but there were many days that the Davis household carried Refuge Temple because Refuge Temple couldn't carry itself, especially in our early days. And when they could carry themselves, if there were extras that needed to be done, we did. You know, we moved into $1 million church and didn't have enough chairs. And my wife and I put together our pennies and reached out to some friends, and we were able to buy the chairs that now grace our sanctuary. Those are the things that sometimes many of us did and still do because of the financial scarcity aspect of, and that's a challenge. That's a stress to ministry. When you got to decide whether you're going to pay your bills or the church bills, you know, that's an issue. When you got to decide which of your bills you're going to pay so you can pay a church bill that needs to be paid, you know, that's an issue. So, you know, we don't talk about this, but this is a reality of what we deal with as it relates to ministry. And, you know, the answer is not just get more people to pay tithes. And you can create a very negative environment in your church if you spend every sermon about giving and about support and about the needs of the ministry. It creates such a toxic culture, you know, as opposed to teaching faith, teaching it correctly, and not teaching it for your own comfort, but teaching it because it's the word of God, and creating a culture where giving is a pleasure for your church. And it took a while to create that. And it's a balance, I would say, between the Bible and the practical. And what I mean is, do your members know how much it costs to run the church? Do they even know that? Because some pastors don't even tell that. And so the members don't know it takes $9,000 a month to pay all the bills of this church, you know, or $12,000 a month or $15,000 a month. People don't know that. And I think sometimes we're afraid to share that. And that's why, in addition to the teaching, you have to have the practical conversations of what it takes to carry on ministry, because ministry is not free. All right. Salvation is free, but ministry is not free. That's why there's a biblical mechanism for the maintenance of ministry. And what you want is a healthy financial view of ministry where people don't cringe every time you say tithes. And at the same time, you don't have to say tithes every week, because the people know to support the church through their tithing and through their giving to the ministry. Strong level of transparency, strong level of being able to answer questions, and then just having financial integrity. But there are some cases, and I'll say some of this is geographic, because some of us are in areas, you know, I'm in an area of North Carolina that is fairly middle class, good jobs, good colleges, good degrees, and that has filtered into our ministry. Some of our churches are in rural areas. They have the larger collection of seniors that are on fixed incomes and limited resources, and that becomes a challenge in terms of how to maintain ministry and how to grow ministry. And so, and a lot of this is a stress source for our pastors. Anybody want to add? Last one is situational adversity. I'm sure most of us have dealt with this. Division within the church. People lined up behind certain people, and sometimes they all loved you, but you had two camps that loved you, and the two camps that loved you didn't like each other. And that creates division in the church. Conflict and casualties. What happens when the conflict hurts your family? What happens when the conflict comes at your family? All right. And there are some pastors that had to make the decision, this is not a good fit for who I am. I'm not meant to fight my way in the church and fight my way through the church and fight my way out the church. And then in so many cases, the third bullet is applicable. I am losing my faith in ministry, or perhaps also in God, because I have dealt with so much conflict and so much negativity and so many things that were going wrong that I just lost faith. I just said, Lord, maybe I'm not the one that you want. Maybe you want somebody else. Or maybe, Lord, can you even fix this? Because these people are so mean to me. You know, or you have loyalties that get out of control, that in the church's loyalty to you, they become abrasive to each other. All of these are adversities that become stressors to a pastor, because nothing stresses me as much as when people I minister to are going at each other, and when they're angry with each other, and when they have angry words and angry attitudes and angry behaviors. That's painful. It's like watching your children fight. And if you've got more than one kid, you know it's very painful when, you know, I mean, the typical sibling things we understand, but when it gets deep-rooted and deep-seated, and, you know, folk talking about, I hate you, and that kind of stuff, and it happens in households sometimes, then you're having a struggle emotionally, because these are your children that are fighting. So that's another source of stress. Any questions or comments? We're going to be done by 1 o'clock, I promise. 5 secrets of stress-resistant pastors. The first thing, secret 1, a core mindset that is focused on eternity. Do we all still believe in heaven? Do we all still believe in the rapture? Do we all still believe that this world is not our home and our home is in heaven? If you're going to pastor in this environment, you've got to have your mind set on eternity. Yes, all of us want to do well, but we have to understand that the true reward comes on the other side. Jesus said, in this world, you will have trouble. As long as you're in this world, you will have trouble, but in me, in Jesus Christ, you have peace. The Bible says in Romans 8:18 that I reckon that the suffering of this present time is not worthy to be compared to the glory that shall be revealed in us. So I didn't come here, listen to us, we say this to our parishioners, but do we believe it? We didn't come here to get everything in this life. We came here to do the will of God and to look to the next life. And every pastor must have a focus on eternity. What I'm doing is for the next life. The reward of your labor, your sacrifice, and your work is going to come not necessarily on this side, but it will definitely come on the other side. And troubles of this life are trifles compared to what is awaiting each of us. That's secret number 1. Is your mind focused on eternity? Is your mind focused on the rapture in heaven? Because as Paul said in 1 Corinthians, if this is all we have, we are of all men most miserable. And as great as your ministry and your life might be, if this is all you got, you're most miserable. Secret 2, a core passion for intimacy with God. Now, I'm going to share this personally. You can get so wrapped up in preaching that you forget your own relationship with God. And you're just preaching and you're pouring out. And that's why, honestly, preachers are sometimes the most likely people to fall into sin, because they're conduits, but they're not receptacles. They're not holding what they're preaching. They're not holding what they're praying for. And you have to have a passion for intimacy with God. That is more important than how well you preach, who comes to church, who paid their tithes. Do you have a core passion for intimacy with God? Are you one with God? Are you and God talking about more than, well, Lord, what am I going to preach on Sunday? What else are you talking to God about? What else are you sharing with God? What else are you unfolding and giving to God? You have to have that intimacy with God. You know, he restoreth my soul. Psalm 23:2. That's the intimacy, that when you're beat up by the church and you're beat up by your sense of failure and you're beat up because you don't have enough time to get everything done, I have a relationship with God that is building my life and holding me and sustaining me. The same thing we preach to the membership, we've got to embrace for ourselves, that we are walking with God. Take my yoke upon you and learn of me, for my yoke is easy. The burden of pastoring might be heavy, but the yoke of Jesus Christ is easy, and my burden is light. Secret 3, a core priority for
Bishop Davis.
Yes, please.
Can I ask a question about
please.
Secret 2? And this is to everyone on here, but certainly Bishop Davis, Bishop Wilkins, any other, individuals that have been in this way a while that can shed light on what are some of your core spiritual disciplines or strategies that work for you to develop, foster, and maintain this passion for intimacy with God?
You've got to have a personal devotional time. And ministry, you preaching, you teaching, is not personal devotional time. And unfortunately, for most of us, we only read our Bibles to get the next sermon or the next Bible class. We just don't. And I remember, and I had to bring myself back to this, because I remember as a young believer, just sitting for hours reading my Bible, just sitting and reading. And then when you get into the cycle of preaching and teaching and whatever, you're looking for the next message. You're looking for the next sermon, as opposed to personal growth and development. Every minister has to have a personal time when you're not praying for Mama Lucy who's sick in the hospital. You're praying for you. Lord, keep my sanity. Lord, help me be a better man, a better husband, a better father. Lord, bless my wife and my children. When are we spending that time with the Lord, as opposed to always being the priest of the congregation and the intercessor of the congregation? When is that personal time with you and God? Because there's some things God wants to say to you about you. You know, and I think we miss that because we don't give the personal time. The ministry has become the replacement for everything. And we have to have that core passion of intimacy just with God. I'm not looking for the next sermon. I'm not looking for a prophetic word for Sister Sally or Brother John. I'm just here to see God for myself. And believe it or not, that will go much further in bringing your congregation to intimacy with God, because you become more intimate with God. And so that's critical. That's a critical part of what we have to do. Anybody else want to chime in? I gave my stuff. Bishop Wilkins? Or anybody, Bishop Austin, anybody, you know, how do we, what are the core disciplines? What are core disciplines?
I would agree with you, Bishop Davis. You got to take that time. That is very crucial, because if you can't get a word, how you going to give a word? Mm-hmm. So you got to be able to speak that time, and not only just for the church, but more so for you.
Absolutely.
Because if you are not strong, then you can be a public success and a private failure. Wow. You know, so you have to spend that time with God, and that's the time that God can tell you about you. Mm-hmm.
So I want to. Oh, I'm sorry. Mm-hmm.
Go ahead.
No, I'm sorry. I was just going to say I agree with you, Pastor. The thing for me is not making the time for prayer and Bible study. It's taking the time for it. Don't try to make time, because you'll never be able to make the time. You got to take the time. So what that looks like for me is very early in the morning, I make that time. And because I'm at the church, we have a noonday prayer. And one of the things that I learned from Bishop Bonner is that you never send the people to prayer. You take the people to prayer. So you have to lead by example, and the people have to see you laying before the Lord. And what I find is that I'm strengthened through my private devotional time with the Lord, just taking that time, making time, taking time every day to do it. Because what I was trying to do is trying to figure out how I can make time, but I never could really make the time. I had to selfishly take the time. So that meant the first thing in the morning, I spent time in some sort of devotional period with the Lord. And another thing, you know, also being ministered to by others. You know, Bishop Davis's prayer and some of my other friends that I watch and others who also minister to me, because the preacher needs to be ministered to as well. And if it is so, for me, part of the challenges of being in ministry full time is when you're in ministry full time, you really don't have opportunities to hear other voices. So I had to find conferences and other places that I could go to, sit in the back and not be Bishop Wilkins, and just simply be a participant and hear some other voices. Because, and with all due respect to even some of my cool JC brothers, for the most part, we all think the same. You know what I mean? We're all saying the same stuff. And so sometimes you got to even reach someplace else to hear something different and to hear some other perspectives. And as a preacher, you're mature enough to be able to spit out the meat and eat them, eat the meat and spit out the bones. So hopefully that helps.
Absolutely. And I will say this as a pastor, this is one, I told my church, I said, I bring an evangelist, not really for you, but for me. I said, because I need to eat. I said, so I'm going to bring the folk and I want to hear. People that I need to listen to that I know are going to feed me. They may not excite you, but they're blessing me. Because I said, when am I eating? And now at this point in life, I'm literally ministering 7 days a week. I need to be able to, as Bishop Wilkins said, not be Pastor Davis and just be Reg and just get fed. And so I do take the time to go hear other ministers, to go to revivals where people are preaching that I know can deliver. And I go there, not as Bishop Davis, I go there just to be fed, because you have to replenish, because some of us, I'm gonna say this, are preaching out of empty wells. All right. And the members don't know it yet, but you know it. Because the one thing I realized, and I'll be transparent, that I was preaching out of an empty well. I was doing my job. I was meeting my responsibilities. I was feeding the sheep, but my well was empty because I was not spending the time I needed to spend with God, and he was not ministering to me. So you don't want to preach out of an empty well. Let's wrap up because I've got 6 minutes. We're going to be done right at 1 o'clock. Secret 3, core priority for a quality marriage. Your spouse must come first before the ministry. Your spouse must come first before the ministry. The first one to tell me this was my mother-in-law. My mother-in-law, Bishop Austin's mother, took me aside one day and said, Reg, before there was a church, there was marriage. Marriage is God's first institution, and we have to honor that. And your wife, and I'm going to be transparent, I've made the mistake of making my wife feel like she was second behind the church. And then you wonder why your spouses drag their feet in what they can do. No woman is going to help you support her competition. That's like your wife getting you dressed up to date another woman. You know, wear this cologne, baby. It's the best cologne. You know, cut your hair like this. Wear this necktie. It looks better. Knowing you going out with another woman. Your wife is not going to do that. If she is, she's crazy. All right. Nor is she going to give herself completely to the ministry if she feels like the ministry will always be her competition. There are times when you have to choose your wife first. In fact, she should be first all the time. And her position must be clearly established and visibly honored. You know, a lot of reasons why some of these guys fall with other women is because they don't talk about their own wives. You need to talk about your wife in front of the church, because trust me, there's a woman in your congregation looking at you right now. You may not know who it is. And my wife told me she knew every woman in my church that was in love with me, but she would never tell me who they were. And so, but she could tell it. All right. But you have to be very careful by how you honor, how you respect, how you talk about, and how you handle yourself with and without your wife, so that everybody knows she is your priority relationship. And there is no reason to sacrifice a pastor's marriage on the altar of misguided priorities. There's no reason. All right. God meant for your marriage to be sound, and he meant for you and your wife to soundly minister to others. And I will say that a lot of us were called to the work and our wives had to catch up. And one of the ways that your wife catching up to being your partner in ministry is, once again, going back to that priority, making sure that she knows that she's the priority. You know, everybody's marriage can be challenging at times. We can be challenging as husbands in how we deal with. And being able to be reflective on this, to reflect on your conduct, your behavior, because women in so many respects are repositories of what we put into them, whether it's encouragement or criticism or whatever. You know, they want the tender time, they want the loving time, they still want romance, even though you've been married for, 30 years, they still want to be romanced. They still want the flowers. They want everything that you use to win them, and then you're engaged in a stressful lifestyle. Ministry is stressful lifestyle, but for your partner to be your partner, You have to balance your life. You know, there are things, you know, I'll tell you this story. When I first started pastoring, and of course, you know, we were driving 70 miles one way to the church, and I wanted my wife to go every time we went out the door. And one time she just didn't feel like going. And, you know, I was getting ready to do the whole, baby, I need you. The people are looking for you. When the Lord said to me emphatically, if any other member of your congregation told you they wouldn't be at service, what would you tell them? And I said, I would tell them, I'll see you next time. And the Lord said, your wife is a member of your congregation. And so creating that safe space where you almost have to separate the marriage from the church, in the sense that I'm not going to keep trying to pressurize my marriage in the church. You know, I'll share this with you. I apologized to my wife in front of our church because in a certain instance, I put the church ahead of her. And I had to make it clear to our congregation that my marriage is going to come first, and that for you to love and respect me, you have to love and respect my wife. You know, and it was something that the Lord made me do. He prompted me to do it because, you know, I don't plan to pastor till I die, but I will be married until I die. And so I have to protect that relationship. And I have to work through. And I would say, if you guys are in a tough place, marriage and ministry, seek counseling from somebody that can relate to what you're dealing with. And I haven't said this, but I think every pastor ought to have an outlet, somebody they talk to in a non-threatening way. You know, it can be a counselor. It can just be another seasoned minister you respect, but you need to have somebody you can talk to that can share and listen and give you feedback, because, and I have that, you know, I've been blessed to have that. I've had that feedback my entire life in ministry, somebody I could talk to that would give me honest talk. We all need that. All right, my time is up. So I'm gonna share these last few slides. Core focus on the family. You have to raise healthy kids, and you have to de-emphasize the fishbowl. I know we brought it up earlier that people are looking at the pastor's family, but your children didn't sign on. They didn't know when they were born they were being born to a pastor's family. They just knew they had mom and daddy. All right. And so you have to protect and cover your children. Don't let everybody beat up on your kids. Don't let everybody beat up on your family. All right. You know, it's still your job to care for them. Finally, secret number 5, create a financial margin. You've got to be able, because more marriages break up over money than over sex, and more preachers' families go through struggles because of money. So adjust your lifestyles so you can breathe comfortably, and the church priority should reflect care for the pastor. If you're pastoring a church and the church is financially able, they should be taking care of the pastor and the pastor's family. That's part of their responsibility. And they shouldn't, and you shouldn't feel bad about the church doing what they're supposed to do for your family, providing the church needs are met as well. So in other words, church bills are paid, your bills are paid, everybody is moving in the right direction. 4 habits that can lower your stress: create a family meal zone. We all know this. Dinner time, try everybody to be at the dinner table enjoying dinner. Outsourcing. Anything that's not in your church, find a way outside of your church economically to do it, whatever that is. You know, if you don't have anybody to clean the church, stop cleaning the church. Hire somebody to clean the church if your church can afford it. All right. Don't you get your mop and bucket and bring your kids and make them clean the church. All right. If you got to hire somebody once a week, and tell the saints it's going to cost us this much to pay this person because none of you are volunteering to do this. All right. Outsourcing. The $4 banquet. Every event with your wife does not have to be expensive. You can go somewhere and eat an ice cream cone and look at the lake. That still works. All right. You can do things that don't always require extravagance to have time in your marriage. And yes, you need home alone too. You need to be home alone sometimes, send those kids to the sitter, you know, and you and your wife just have the house to yourselves. All right. And enjoy the pleasure of company, because the stronger your marriage is going to feed into your ministry. Folks, thank you so much. I'm going to pause if there are any questions or comments, but it is 1:02, and I promise you we will be done at 1 o'clock. And I apologize for going over.
Thank you, Bishop David. This was a blessing.
Thank God. Thank God. Thank God.
Bishop Davis, this is Bishop Bailey. We were not able to be on the whole time, but the part that we heard, we commend you. Wonderful job. Thank you for the information. It helped me very much.
Thank God. Thank God. And if I don't have your email address, my cell number is 336-512-1061. Please text me an email address and I will email the materials from today to you, because I want you to have that. I want you to have that. All right. I pray that this was a blessing. Let's have a brief word of prayer. Father, we thank you for this time and for everyone that has shared their time with us today. Lord, I pray that something was said, some nugget was given that is helping somebody strengthen their ministry, their life, the call of God upon them. I pray for everybody and every struggle that each of us might have at this moment, that you would give us the grace, the power, the insight to go forward and to do your will. I pray, God, that you bless our spouses, that you bless our children, that you bless the church congregations that we serve, and give us life and strength and help us, God. Thank you for everyone on this line today. We pray your blessing now in Jesus' name. Amen. Well, God bless you, everybody. Thank you so much